Chatter and blurting can be so challenging in the classroom and really wreak havoc with your ability to teach. So, we're going to tackle that in today's episode. Welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe that our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. We also want to thank our sponsor, Liberty University. Do you want to be the next champion for Christ? At Liberty University School of Education, they empower educators to make an eternal impact. With innovative programs, experienced faculty, and flexible online options, you can earn your degree on your timeline. Join a community dedicated to excellence and transform your passion into a rewarding career. Visit liberty.edu/education to learn more. Liberty University School of Education, where your journey to inspire begins. Today, we're going to talk about what to do if you have a lot of chatter going on in your classroom. And this is it's kind of funny with all of the, issues that we're dealing with today that are so much worse or crazier than they were 5, 10, 20 years ago. This is an issue that, they were dealing with 50 years ago. We're still dealing with today. It looks a little bit different, but it's an issue that's really can sidetrack and really disrupt your ability to teach. And so it's something that we really do need to tackle if it's causing you, your classroom to be really chaotic and really causing a lot of issues. So today what we want to do is give you a plan for dealing with chatter and blurting. And in particular, what I want to do is share what worked in my classroom. And this is just one strategy, but I want to share with you the strategy that worked for me and that has helped a lot of teachers that we work with in our Classroom Management 101 program. So what I want to do is start off by thinking through some of the mistakes we make when it comes to chatter and blurting. And I will tell you, this is totally what I did when I first started teaching. And that is one of the mistakes we make is letting little things go, particularly with chatter and blurting. So I remember when I first started teaching, students were just whispering a little bit to each other or, just talking a little bit. And I didn't have a plan for how I was going to deal with that. I hadn't figured that out. I hadn't thought that through. I was very prepared to teach math. I wasn't so prepared to deal with that. I just hadn't figured out what I was going to do. And so I just let it go, partly because I didn't think it was a big deal and partly because I didn't know what to do. But unfortunately, little problems don't stay little, especially when it comes to chatter and blurting in the classroom. So students are just naturally going to push that, that talking boundary, and they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they find where the boundary is. And a lot of times, we are way past where we want it to be by the time we're like, okay, I got to do something about this. So if we let little things go, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And that's what happened to me, particularly my first year. I soon found myself by, probably by October, definitely by November, where I would be trying to start my first period class and I could like barely get their attention above the noise. There was just, most of the class was not paying attention to me, which is involved in their own conversations. And it was kind of like there were a few different, I had 6 different classes. A couple were fine, but most of them, it was a fight kind of to keep attention. And it was just way too much chatter, way too much blurting. And it was so chaotic. It was definitely affecting my ability to teach and be effective in the classroom. So I went to my mentor teacher and said, I need some help. What am I going to do? And she gave me an idea that actually came from the First Days of School book, if you guys remember that book. It's about a warning system. And I'm going to share with you how it works here in a minute. We've kind of adapted the system and updated it a little bit over the years as we've worked with teachers and heard how they use the system. But the core of it is really still the same. And so here's how the warning system works. What you do is when a student is talking, even if it's just a little bit, if they're disrupting or basically if they're over the boundary, they excuse me, they get a warning. Now, before actually I get to this, I need to back up one step. And that is you first need to clearly define what the boundary is. We teach teachers to do this in Classroom Management 101. You got to start by clarifying your expectation. So you have to think about, What is and is not acceptable as far as talking in my classroom? Is it literally no talking ever? Probably not. There's probably times when they're allowed to talk and times when they're not. Think about that with blurting too. Are there times where you want them to be able to say something and times that they're not? Or should they always raise a hand? Basically, though, you need to be clear on your mind of basically where exactly is the line so that you know when a student's crossed it and the student knows that too. So make sure you step back and ask yourself, am I actually clear on when students can talk and when they can't, when they can blur and when they can't? You need to be clear that in your head. Then you need to communicate that with them so that everyone is on the same page. And by the way, talking levels can sometimes be helpful for this. You might discover, yeah, sometimes I want it absolutely silent. Sometimes it's okay. They just need to talk. If I might allow them to talk, but it needs to be quiet, so sometimes it's good to have different talking levels so that you can then say we're at level 1 or we're at level 2. That can be a helpful way to clarify expectations. So before you use the warning system, you need to clarify your expectations. Then here's how the warning system works. When a student is past that boundary, so whatever that boundary is, when they pass it, even if it's just a little bit, they get a warning, okay? Now, the warning needs to be able to be given in a way that does not interrupt your flow of teaching. That's really important because you might be giving out, 20 warnings in a given class period or more. So you need to be able to do it without interrupting your flow of teaching. So how you're going to give the warning is going to depend on the age of your students. The old school way of doing it for any age would have been to put names on the board. But here's some alternate options. Once again, these kind of different ones are more appropriate for different ages. Some teachers use class dojo, especially if they show that where students can see that right away. It is important the student can see it. So if you're putting a class dojo point and they're not going to see it till tomorrow, that's not going to work. But if it's somewhere where they could see it, that could work. My favorite idea for older kids, but this would work for younger kids too, is to take little yellow cards and laminate them like a yellow card someone would get in soccer, right? For a penalty, for a foul. So you can take that, print out a whole bunch of those, laminate them, cut them out. And then when a student needs to get a warning, you simply walk and just set it on their desk. So that's how you could give a warning. I've had elementary teachers, especially lower elementary, have something on students' desks. So one teacher made laminated 3 bubbles and that lived on the students' desks. And she would take a dry erase marker and just go over and put an X on one of the bubbles to pop the bubble. Or maybe wet erase is better so they can't as easily delete it for you. So those are some different ways to do warnings. You can get creative with that. The key though is you need to be able to give it in a way that you don't have to stop teaching and the student can immediately see it. Now, when you give the warning, this is very key. Nothing happens. There is no consequence. The student is not in trouble, and you need to explain that to them ahead of time because they need to understand they're not in trouble, and you'll have to remind them of that. And I even use those words. You're not in trouble if you're kind of getting arguments about warnings. You don't need to argue with students about warnings because they're not in trouble. All you're doing is making them aware that they were interrupting the class, that they were being disruptive, okay? The goal then is that the student sees that warning and says, okay, I need to self-correct because if I get, in my class, it was 3 warnings in one class period. So if I get 3 warnings in the same class period, now I'm going to have a consequence. So I have a warning. I need to be more careful. Okay, now I have 2 warnings. Now I really need to be careful. If they do get 3 warnings or whatever number you choose, you do need to be ready to hand out a consequence. That is an important piece of it. And I think you'll find with this system, you're probably going to need to give a consequence out when you first implement it. You're going to need to do that once or twice so that students see, oh, they're serious. They actually are going to give the consequence if we get to this spot. But after that initial period, you'll probably find that you don't get to that point that often. With over 100 students, I would probably give out consequences like 10 times a year. It just wasn't that common because the warnings reset fairly often. You had to get 3 in one class period. And set it up that way intentionally because the goal isn't to just give out a ton of consequences. The goal is to teach students to notice that they're being disruptive because you gave them a warning and to self-correct. And this system allows that without needing to give very many consequences at all. So that's the gist of how the system works. Now, one thing I want to talk about is what if you have a student that um, is, if you really gave them a warning every single time they disrupted, and it was 3 warnings per class period, they would get consequences within the first 5 minutes of every single class. Like they physically don't have that self-control ability. Well, what you can do is adapt it for that student. So you might say, you know what, this student, gets 10 warnings. They're going to get more warnings because basically your goal for that student might be different than the rest of the class because it might simply be improvement, right? So, as you're deciding the number of warnings and how often they reset, in high school and middle school, it's fairly easy. They can reset every period. In elementary, you're probably going to have a few reset periods throughout the day. But it's really up to you how you want to set it up. But it's important that you feel like this is attainable for my students. They should be able to get through the class period without this number of warnings. If you don't feel like it's attainable, increase the number of warnings to start, and you can always decrease it as the student's self-control improves. Okay. And once again, just to be clear, it is okay if you have some students that are big behavioral needs, it is okay to adapt the system for them, to give them additional warnings. And it's actually, the system is very easily differentiable in that way, which can actually end up being a really, really big help. So, what did I find when I implemented this system in my classroom? Well, I found that at first, it's not like it immediately helped the first day. When I first implemented it, the students kind of were trying to see if I was really serious, right? And they didn't really like the system, and I had a lot of arguing. So, you do need to be prepared for that if you've never done anything like this in your classroom before. A couple words of advice: you don't need to argue back, okay? Use the words, "You're not in trouble." That you don't need to argue with them about whether or not they should have had a warning. It's okay. And just realize that students, remember we talked about how students push the boundaries and they're looking to see where they are. That's what they're going to do. You're trying to establish a new boundary. And honestly, you're trying to push back on habits that are way past where you want them to be, right? You're pushing back on bad habits. So don't expect that to happen immediately. Just hold the line and be consistent. As you are consistent with the line, that's when students are going to realize, okay, this really is where the line is. So be prepared for it to take a little bit of time. Don't give up on it after one day. Do not. You got to give the system at least a week. I recommend 2 to really see how it's going to work for your classroom. If you implement it really consistently for 2 weeks, then you'll be able to see, yes, this helped. Or if perchance it doesn't, then you'll know I really gave this a good try and I can move on to try something else. But in my classroom, this made worlds of a difference. And the main reason was because I was able to deal with the issue while it was small. I wasn't waiting until it was like utter chaos to get someone in trouble. And then it's this arbitrary line of like, why are we in trouble now when we weren't a minute ago, and why them? And so it felt fair. It helped students. The biggest thing is it promoted that individual responsibility and helped students self-correct before they needed to get in trouble. And it just brought the talking level down dramatically after that initial period. So it did reduce it dramatically. And I will say the real magic happened. This is how the real magic happened in my classroom. The first year I implemented the system, it helped a ton. It really brought the talking level down, but it still wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. And that's because I was pushing back on that bad habits, bad inertia. It was kind of like still fighting that battle. They had gotten these bad habits. So However, I was getting a lot better at dealing with stuff. So I was getting used to dealing with warnings. I was becoming more consistent. I was becoming more confident in my ability to deal with it. So when my next school year started, I did a few things differently. I was ready on day 1 with the warning system. And the very first time someone disrupted, I was ready with the warning. And that made such a difference because at that start of school, even though I had some of the same students as the year before, it's that fresh start and they're kind of like, where's the line? And I was like, it's right here. From day 1, this is the line. It was really clear. And then also I was confident in my skills. And that's another piece of this. If we're confident in what we're doing, that is like this unspoken signal to the students, like, don't mess with me. I'm confident and I'm competent. The reverse, though, unfortunately, is also true. If we are not confident, the students pick up on that too, and they kind of sense, oh, she's not so sure about this, and that tends to make them pounce and push that boundary like even further. So bottom line, this system helped me a ton in the year that I implemented it. And then as my skills grew, as my confidence grew, and as I used it right off the bat the next year, that was when it was really, really amazing. And I'm not saying I never had any discipline issues after that. That's never going to be a realistic expectation. But it brought the levels down to a very reasonable amount. And I was able to really teach. They weren't a big problem in the classroom anymore. And that made such a big difference. So I hope that this has given you some ideas for your classroom. It might be a system for you to try out and see how it would work. If you want to find out more, and honestly, this is one of the things that's hard about an episode like this is I'm giving you one system, but there's so many other pieces that tie in together. So if you have not yet watched our free training, How to Reduce Disruption So You Can Actually Teach, I'm going to really encourage you to hop over there. What I share in there is not the same as what I just shared here. It really talks about the whole system and how you can work things together to reduce disruptions in your classroom. It's completely free. Just go to teachfortheheart.com/free to sign up for that. And then, of course, we always have Classroom Management 101, which is our comprehensive online course where we walk you through step by step, help you create a plan and implement it so that you can reduce disruptions in your classroom. And Classroom Management 101 is always available at teachfortheheart.com/CM101. Well, this episode has been brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. If you've enjoyed this episode, I do hope that you will subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Well, thank you guys so much. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.